Okay. So, life in Sparta. Yesterday we talked about the government a little bit. We talked about, why Sparta was so strict. Now let's talk about for life for the regular people. First off, if you're a Spartan, you weren't allowed to leave Sparta unless you had special permission. That's right. The Spartans stayed in Sparta. They weren't allowed to travel freely. It also meant people weren't allowed to travel into Sparta without special permission as well. So people were stuck in Sparta. Please stop, Amelia. Emmy, you have your own. Go get the stuff in there. I need that, please. All right. Also, we know that the Spartans, they did not want things like philosophy, literature, or the arts as part of their education. It was all about military practice. It was, things to go. Reading would be taught, but they wouldn't go teach the other aspects. No literature, no philosophy. And it was all because Sparta was about the army. Now, children would receive an education, boys and girls, until they were 7. So that's right. You got kindergarten, first grade, and maybe second grade. Now, that's all that they got. And then boys went to war, and girls learned how to take care of a home. So, as we've talked about many times, the boys started their military training at age 7. They start their military training at age 7. And at 13, boys got dropped off in the middle of the woods. They'd be taken a place they'd never been. They're blindfolded on the way there, and then they're left with nothing. And they had to survive without being caught thieving or anything like that. They had to survive with nothing. They were given a cloak, and that's it, and there would be wild animals, all sorts of dangerous things. No extra food given. They had to find their own food. They had to survive. During this military training, children would be beaten. They wouldn't be given enough food to begin with, and then they would be forced to have to steal for food. But if you're caught stealing, you'd be beaten. Sometimes they just beat the kids for fun. They'd train in wrestling and fighting. And, fighting dirty would be something that they'd be encouraged to do, but not to be caught doing, And sometimes, unfortunately, boys died doing this kind of fighting and wrestling. When you're at age 20, typically the boys would marry. And the way they proposed is when they would tell a girl that they loved them, they would have to then wrestle them. And because the girls were always training too, sometimes the girls still won. And then, the boys would not be able to marry them then until they were strong enough to beat them. And this was a very, very common occurrence happening. Kind of wild. I can't imagine when I asked Mrs. Kenny to marry me, if I was like, all right, let's fight. Now, even though they're married, though, they still lived in the barracks. And so they didn't even get to live with their wives and their family. They had to go and stay with the military. And the only way they could see their family is if they snuck out of the barracks. But once again, if they snuck out and were caught, they would be in incredible trouble. It's like crazy, thinking about it. And one of the things, too, which is pretty wild, is that at 18, I forgot, I should have put this in there, and I apologize. The way a Spartan, quote unquote, became a man, he had to sneak out of the military barracks, find a helot, which was a slave. He had to kill the slave, return to the barracks, and do this all without getting caught, but he had to have some sort of evidence that he had done it. That's how a Spartan, said he, quote unquote, became a man. He had to commit murder and sneak out and not get caught doing it. It's horrible. Horrible, horrible. Now, at age 30, he finally got to move home. He became a full Spartan citizen. He could live with his family. But here's the crazy thing. Every single meal that he and his family had was still taken in the military dining hall. And what the Spartans would do is every family was supposed to bring something, anything. So, like, if Alexander's family had like a can of corn, they'd bring a can of corn. If Shania's family had like a can of beans, they'd bring a can of beans. If Danny's family had a can of tomatoes, they'd bring that. If Kirthana had, a couple of pork chops, they'd bring that. If Michael had, a couple meatballs, he'd bring that. If Khan had then some pasta, he'd bring that. And they would all bring it, and they would mix everything in one big pot. I'm serious. Every family had to bring something, and then they would take everything and just mix it in a big pot. And that would cook like all day, and then the Spartans, they would eat this like tasteless, gross, like slop for dinner and for lunch and breakfast. And that's, yeah, it is ill. It's totally ill. Because the Spartans, I don't know about you guys, but I find having a nice meal is one of the most enjoyable things. I love like sitting down with friends and family and just eating something yummy, like a good steak, or I made meatballs that were like the best meatballs I've ever made, and it was just amazing. And I love having that time with friends and family, eating, and we got some sparkling cran grape juice, and we gave that to, like, we shared that as a family the other day. My daughter loved it, and having that with a meal is an awesome time. And the Spartans, though, they knew that it was a good time, and so they took the joy out of that too, because it was about, you remember Draco and his life in there. It was not about going and enjoying life and about living life. It was just going and being a Spartan. Well, they didn't have ice cream back then, but yeah, people would throw it in the pot and it would cook down and it would be gross. This is a statement that a Spartan mother would tell to her son before she went off to war. Return with your shield or on it. Does anyone think they have an idea what that means? What do you think, Michael?
I think it means if you win, you're gonna return with your shield, or if you die in battle, they're gonna bring your body parts on the shield.
Yeah, and that's what Eliza said too, and Evelyn, what she has that. Yeah, it's this idea that if you return with your shield, that means you won the battle. Riley's there. He's got his shield. He's got his spear. He's coming back from the war. He is alive and well. If Riley were to run away, he'd probably drop his shield, because his shield was his heaviest piece of equipment, and and that would weigh him down. And people running for their lives would go and not have their shield with them. So the mommy didn't say come back alive, return with your shield. Return. You said return with your shield, and went on it. Michael's exactly right. They would carry the bodies back to Sparta on their shields, and that was it. Yes, Danny, you had a question or comment, sir?
It was a comment.
Okay. Did you want to say it or no?
It was just another thing for that.
Okay. Michael, did you have something else to say, sir?
No, I'm sorry. I just kept my hand up.
Oh, it's okay. It's no problem, bro. I made that mistake the other day when I was in a meeting. I had my hand up for like 20 minutes. I was like, oops. Now, like we talked about this, when babies were first born, they would bathe them in wine, which may or may not kill the baby. If they survived, the elders would examine the baby. And if the elders found anything wrong with the baby, they found a birth defect, or they thought the baby was too small, or they didn't like where the birthmark was, or anything, the elders would say that the baby was unfit, and they would leave it to die on the hillside. Now, other city-states did this sort of thing too, but Sparta is the most famous for it, where they would let the child die because of the elements, meaning an animal got them, or, too cold, no food, things like that. Just horrible. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. Otherwise, the baby, if it was deemed acceptable, would then be brought back to the parents, and then and only then would be given a name. Now, Spartan women learned how to read and write. That's one thing that they had ahead of Athenian women. Spartan women, they learned reading and writing. And girls were given physical training. And it was harsh physical training, too. Boys would be beaten, girls would be beaten, too. The Spartans were just mean and nasty kind of all around to kids growing up. And they would go and, but they would do sports, they would train, and they were expected to be excellent. And girls in Sparta were allowed to own property and control land, which once again, we know in Athens, they were not allowed to be able to do those sort of things. So a lot more freedom for girls. And part of this was because, the girl was expected, when the husband was gone, they were in charge. They took over, or they took care of things. And there's one instance of this happening in history, the idea was, if all of the boys were gone at war, Ivan and Jason and Cortez and Iker are out to war, Adelina, Jackie, and Riley were expected to pick up spears if Sparta became under attack and to defend Sparta themselves. And that actually happened once in history. Okay, so that is going to be the notes for the day. I am going to stop the recording. And let's